We'll just kind of wing it, I guess.
Okay. And you were trying to target an hour-ish, so like I shouldn't ramble into the weeds too much kind of thing?
Ramble into the weeds.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't worry. I'll pull us out of it if we get too far.
All right.
Okay.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Today, we are doing something a little, I would say unique, a little different. How about that? A little different. We are keeping our pinky toe in Gettysburg, and we are skipping ahead several years, almost a decade, to another famous battle that involves one of the famous generals here at Gettysburg, and that is the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And who better to join me than Jim Hessler? Hello, Jim.
Hello, Matt.
We've been talking about doing this for months now.
Yeah, we have.
Finally got around to doing it. And I'm very excited about it. This is my other favorite battle.
Mine
my
too.
second favorite battle.
Yeah, we share that passion for podcasting and Little Bighorn.
Yes.
Like how would two guys like that end up in
Someday
the same town?
when we're sick of Gettysburg, we should do a Little Bighorn podcast.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm Addressing Little Bighorn. Brought to you by
Yeah.
Propane.
It
would
doesn't-
be great. It would be great.
It doesn't work as well addressing with other battles because
We'll
there
work
was
on
no
that.
Little
We'll work-
Bighorn
we'll work
address.
on that.
But whatever.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But anyway, so we decided. I said, Jim, why don't you come on? Let's do a show about Little Bighorn. But it's really just an excuse to talk about the Little Bighorn. And I said, well, there's a couple of guys who are at Gettysburg there, so there's our tie-in. And
Yeah, we'll try to
Bob's your uncle. There we go.
tangentially connect it all
Right.
together so that the hardcore Gettysburg audience is not repulsed by
Yes,
the topic.
like, ugh, what is
oh my
this?
God, I'm canceling my Patreon
Right?
subscription.
Yeah. What am I paying for?
That's right. My God.
So let's give them a little bit of a background first. For those of you who are not Little Bighorn aficionados or even casual students of that battle, let's give you a background into that. What was it? What was the purpose? How did it come about? Why? What was going on? And then what happened on the battlefield?
Sure.
I mean, you don't have to get crazy into it, but give them an idea so that all this other stuff makes sense.
And I would say too, for anybody who's kind of skeptical about the topic, before we get into it, you could argue Battle of Little Bighorn is actually even more iconic in American culture than the Battle of Gettysburg is. I'm not saying that it is, but you can make the argument.
You could make the argument.
There's certainly an equal number of books, specialty groups that are devoted to the topic. How many times has the Battle of Gettysburg been portrayed on screen versus the Battle of Little Bighorn? So
I think Little Bighorn wins there.
I think they do win there. I think they do win there.
For decades.
Custer just looks better on screen than George Meade does. So that could be part of it too.
That is a huge part of it, I'm sure.
So yeah, for anybody who's skeptical, I would say, this is, if you kind of look at this whole period, 1860s, 1870s, even up to, Wounded Knee in 1890, this is a defining moment in, our American experience. And, it goes beyond 1863. But, to answer your question, I think, where I often start is after Appomattox, after the close of the American Civil War, obviously the country is looking to expand westward.
Right.
At the same time, the Army is downsizing, yet they are also establishing a couple of new cavalry regiments to basically patrol this vast western frontier. And that's how the 7th Cavalry, comes into existence in 66.
So let's pause there for a second. So explain this now. We're students of the Civil War were used to these big, huge armies, corps, divisions, all that other stuff. But these regiments, 7th U.S. Cavalry, is what? It's posted somewhere out west, and it's responsible for this huge expanse of land. How does that all work?
Yeah. So what happens is, somewhat similar to Reconstruction, but what they do is, they carve up the country into these departments, these military departments. Hancock commands one, for example. And what they do is they raise a couple regiments of cavalry. They still have a few regiments of infantry in the field as well, but they raise these guys basically to, you'll be assigned here and you're going to patrol, this vast, expansive frontier. Now, in the case of the 7th Cavalry, you're talking 12 companies, and what you see basically from the time they're formed in 1866 up until the Little Bighorn debacle in 1876, almost at no time do those 12 companies serve together. So to your point, it's not even like we're posted at a fort and we got to patrol the area. It might be like, okay, 8 companies are going to Dakota, 2 companies are going to Texas, send a couple companies to Kentucky. And so what you start to realize is, the army of that period just has a ridiculous amount of space, to try to patrol and manage.
But not enough people.
And not enough people, because again, they've seriously downsized the numbers after the war.
What are we looking at the end of the war? What does the army look like when everybody's gone home?
Yeah, I forget the numbers. I don't
Roughly.
I mean, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but you're looking at, obviously most of our Civil War heroes have gone home, and what you have is you have some of the officers like a Custer, like a Hancock, John Gibbon, to throw some Gettysburg connections out there. You have these guys basically looking to stay in the army, often at reduced ranks to what they were doing in the Civil War. You're no longer managing motivated volunteers. These are in many cases guys who can't get a job in another profession, kind of thing.
Kind of the dregs of society.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I hate to diminish these guys by using that label, but in a lot of cases, that's true. Immigrants, guys who look at an army career is an opportunity, but really they can't get something anywhere else.
Guys avoiding the law.
Perhaps? And so what you have is a lot of disciplinary issues, desertion rates, and things of that nature, considerably higher than, again, what we're used to thinking of in the more highly motivated volunteer regiments of the Civil War.
So Custer, like many other officers, at the end of the war, gets bumped down to his regular army rank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
End of the Civil War, we're talking. Which was captain?
Yeah. So he ends the Civil War as a brevet major general, but reverts to a regular rank captain at the end of the war.
And where does he go before he's out west, where he gets into the Little Bighorn? Where does he first go after?
Yeah, well, they send him on to some reconstruction duty in Texas. So he spends a little bit of time down there. And then, he actually, even for a while, looks at taking an assignment in Mexico. But Sherman, Sheridan, and Grant and those guys are kind of loath to let officers kind of leave to go go serve in a foreign service.
Yeah.
So after Reconstruction duty in Texas, he's kind of looking around a little bit for the next gig. And like I said earlier, until 1866, when they form the new 7th Cavalry, and he is then appointed lieutenant colonel of the regiment. It should be pointed out, the guy never commands the regiment. At no time in his career is he colonel of the 7th Cavalry. There's always somebody ahead of him, but usually it's an older officer, a guy who's more strapped to a desk, in St. Louis or places like that. And so what a younger and more enthusiastic and energetic guy like Custer gets is field command,
right?
And that's why he becomes so closely associated with the 7th.
As at the time of the Little Bighorn was. Let me see if I get this right. Sturgis?
Yeah.
Sturgis was the colonel.
Colonel Sam Sturgis, right. Another Civil War vet.
And he had a son who was in the regiment and got wiped out with Custer,
Unfortunately,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, but so now, all right, so now he's second in command of the 7th. It's 1876. What's going on prior to the Bighorn campaign? What's going on that leads to that?
It leads up to all of that. Yeah, so, getting back to kind of the earlier point, we're talking about, obviously there's westward expansion going in through the 1860s and into the early 1870s. Following Red Cloud's War on the Bozeman Trail in 66, 67, and the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, among many other things, basically gave the sacred Black Hills to the Sioux. Sioux, and that was basically, confirmed that the Sioux were going to own the Black Hills. The problem is the country continues to expand westward in the early 1870s, and there's an economic panic, I think, in 73, if I remember correctly. But in 1874, Custer is ordered with the 7th to lead an army expedition into the Black Hills that's basically going to confirm gold in the Black Hills. Okay,
so now, there's a rumor of gold, and they want to go and confirm
exactly,
it.
Exactly, and they go in and confirm it,
even though now it's sacred Sioux land.
Exactly. So now, of course, the U.S. government wants the Black Hills, and they try to negotiate. They try to get the Sioux to sell, and the Sioux are pretty solid that no, we're not giving up our Black Hills. And so finally, this comes to a head in the winter of 1876, where Grant, Sheridan, George Crooks, the War Department, they get together at the White House in January of 1876, or maybe it's late fall of 75. But what they basically say is that by the end of January 1876, we are going to send out a message to all the Indians out in the field, those who haven't come into the reservations. We're going to send out a message to them and basically tell them they have until January 31st to come into the reservations, and if you don't come in, we're going to turn the matter over to the War Department and send the army into the field to come and get you.
So wait, they're going to send a message at the late in January and then say by
exactly. It's
that same year?
It's a ridiculous notion.
Okay.
And it's basically a legal form of, saying, hey, we did our part. We told them we had it. Yeah. They had until January 31st to come in. So it's a ridiculous notion. Obviously no Indians out in the field are going to get this message, but it's kind of then the legal justification for Grant, who, is kind of lukewarm on all of this, but it's legal justification for the Grant administration to turn it over to the War Department and for the military to go into the field and, potentially kind of quote unquote settle the Indian matter once and for all.
So Custer at that point in the year is what's he up to at that point?
Yeah, so there was no great expedition of the 7th Cavalry in 1875. So he spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth to New York. But as they're starting to mobilize this campaign for the winter, and then it's going to bleed over into the spring of 1876, Custer is called to Washington to testify in a scandal that is basically involving Secretary of War William Belknap. There's allegations of graft and kickbacks and things going on in the appointment of post-traderships out west. They call Custer in to testify what he knows.
Right.
Custer's gotten kind of an unfair rap, I think, in this episode among historians, because a lot of historians kind of do he went to Washington and he wanted to be president, and all this stuff. He actually didn't want to go. He was summoned to testify. He tried to get out of it, and they said, no, you're summoned. You got to go.
Okay.
So anyway, so he went to Washington. His testimony against Belknap also implicated Orville Grant, which then kind of ticked off President Grant,
his brother.
Exactly. And so what's happening now in the spring of 76, while Phil Sheridan and other military leaders are getting ready to put this expedition into the field, basically Custer's held up in Washington, and Grant is so ticked off at Custer. At one point, Grant basically says, tell the expedition to go forward without Custer. So Custer almost missed Custer's last stand.
It would have been so awkward too.
Yeah, like how do you name? What are you going to name?
What are you going to name it?
Yeah, exactly,
or it happens and it's named after you. You're not even there.
Yeah.
So Orville Grant, real quick. What did he have a government job?
I forget his specific role in all of that, but I mean, in essence, he was also accused of accepting kickbacks and bribes and things of that nature. So, and again, like I said, obviously didn't make the president. None too happy with Custer.
Right. Okay. I just couldn't remember what he had.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Custer goes, who's in charge of the expedition?
Yeah. So the idea is they're going to put 3 columns into the field.
Yes.
And again, Gettysburg connection coming in along the Yellowstone River will be Colonel John Gibbon, primarily commanding about 400 guys or so, infantry, couple companies of cavalry. Gibbon, and again, another example, general in the Civil War. He reverts to the rank of colonel at the end of the Civil War. Because you always hear people say, Custer wasn't a real general. Well, again, a lot of these guys reverted.
But you called them, you would be called your highest rank.
You often would.
It was a courtesy.
Exactly. General Custer and General Gibbon and things of that matter. So anyways, there's 3 columns in the field. Colonel John Gibbon, Gettysburg veteran, has one of the columns in the field, and he's going to kind of be see, I like the camera. I can kind of almost like we've got a map here.
It's like you could do like Michael Scott mugging to the camera.
Well, it's almost like I kind of have a map here. So imagine like the Yellowstone River up here. Gibbon is basically to patrol the Yellowstone River and try to prevent Indians from escaping too far to the north. So that's column number 1. Gibbon. Coming up from the south is Brigadier General George Crook, another Civil War veteran. He's got about an 1,100-man command or so, and he's basically going to come up from Wyoming and try to basically drive any, I'll use the word hostiles because that's what they used. Yeah, any hostiles in from the south. Last but not least, getting to your question, coming in from the east, Dakota Territory is going to be in about 1,100-man column under Brigadier General Alfred Terry, another Civil War hero. Terry, Terry is by this point in his career primarily more of a desk jockey, and really doesn't have any field experience against Indians. But as part of the Terry column is going to include the 7th Cavalry, which again, because of the issues going on in Washington, may or may not include Custer. So Custer in the 7th Cavalry are going to be under the command of Brigadier General Alfred Terry for the expedition.
So it's not that just this wacky General Custer is just riding roughshod all over the plains, killing Indians. He was part of a bigger plan.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because, it's look, our country is troubled by our treatment of Indians and Native Americans during this period, as we should be. But, Custer, because George Armstrong Custer is the most famous Indian fighter in American history, not necessarily the most successful, but he's the most famous one.
Right.
People, to your point, often have this idea of him riding roughshod, storming into villages, killing Indians left and right. A lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army did not set this country's Indian policy.
Right.
And if you want to hate Custer for going out west after the Civil War to fight Indians, you can do that. But so did Winfield Hancock. So did Oliver Howard. So did John Gibbon. And so did, many other Civil War
Wesley
veterans.
Merritt.
Yeah, Wesley Merritt, another example. Nelson Miles, a personal Civil War favorite of mine.
Crook,
Terry, all kinds of guys. So the point being, Custer is part of a broader expedition. And again, frankly, as a lieutenant colonel, he's kind of low on the command chain, and he's really just, got to kind of follow orders.
So in the Terry column, you said it was 1,100 men?
About 1,100, yeah.
So you got the 7th, which has like 600 something?
Yeah, give it a little over 600.
And then the 2nd?
You've got a couple companies of infantry in there.
Okay.
A couple companies of infantry in there.
Wait, who's the infantry? What are they?
I forget which units are with Terry, but there's a couple units of infantry with Terry. They've got the Gatling guns.
Right.
Then you've got a couple. I think you referred to the 2nd Cavalry.
Yeah.
You've got some of the 2nd Cavalry under Major James Brisbane, sort of thing. So it's a really broad expedition with a lot of stuff going. The strike force is the 7th, right? The 7th is, the 7th is the A team, kind of thing. But
all right, so Custer does get to take command of the 7th.
Yeah.
How do they get him back in?
Yeah, so eventually, Grant has basically said, okay, the expedition is going to go forward without Custer. Custer, as we said, Alfred Terry really doesn't have experience against Indians. He clearly wants Custer along. Phil Sheridan wants Custer along. So as the story goes, Custer kind of goes to General Terry and with tears in his eyes basically says, please, you got to do something. You got to intercede for me. And so Terry, who was a former lawyer, I should add, Terry and Custer kind of draft this note to Grant that basically says, General Grant, President Grant, I appeal to you as a soldier to spare me the humiliation of seeing my command march to meet the enemy, and I not share in the dangers. Kind of thing. And that seems to work. And Grant says, okay, fine. Custer can go. He's not commanding the column. Terry's still going to do that, but Custer can go with his regiment. And by the way, tell Custer not to take along any newspaper guys because they're going to create mischief. Yeah. And he does take along a newspaperman, Mark Kellogg. And again, it's something he's criticized for. But Crook, with his column, has several newspapermen too. But nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about that, right? So
he's placed in command now. Again, like you said before, Sturgis is the actual commander, but he's back at a desk. Where were they? At Fort Lincoln, right?
Well, yeah. The home base of the 7th Cavalry is Fort Lincoln in Dakota Territory. Now, Sturgis is not there. If I remember right at this point, Sturgis might be in St. Louis. But the other thing the other thing that's going on too that we should point out is obviously the summer of 1876 is the big centennial in Philadelphia.
That's right.
So a lot of Army officers are taking leave and that sort of thing to go to the centennial in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And even a couple of senior guys in the 7th, who should have been in the field with their regiment were also on leave too. So we'll just kind of throw that in.
Sure, that's a big thing.
It's a centennial. The country's feeling good about themselves. Yeah. It's presidential election year. Wouldn't it be great, if we just give them a victory over Mr. Sitting Bull kind of thing?
Doesn't Custer say that at least to Libby or his wife Libby, or is that just something that I might have seen in movies?
Which piece?
Where he says, let's give the country a birthday present or something.
Yeah, well, that's probably more movie than than fact kind of thing. But I think that feeling is generally rampant within the Army, and Custer talking to Terry and saying, let's wrap this up, and we can get we can get some good news over to Philadelphia kind of thing. I think probably everybody was certainly aware of that and hoping for that.
So the expedition begins.
Yeah.
It's a 3-pronged attack. They're going to surround and gobble up
north,
the Indians.
east, south. They're coming in from 3 directions.
Is it like, except for the little Bighorn battle, of course, except for the 7th Cavalry, otherwise, is it a rousing success?
Not really. So here's the thing. Initially, I think what Sheridan tried to do was get the columns into the field in the winter. And, this had been successful in, Custer's victory at the Washita in Oklahoma in 1868. But he's trying to get, I think initially Sheridan's trying to get everybody into the field in the winter, when the Indians are immobile, their ponies are weakened, there's snow and all that stuff. But, Custer gets delayed. Terry's column gets delayed, but Crook gets into the field in March and actually attacks a village in March that initially is successful, but then the warriors kind of rally. The army has to retreat, that sort of thing. They leave some wounded men in the hands of the enemy, which, doesn't play well with the enlisted guys.
Sure.
And that sort of thing. And Crook ends up kind of preferring charges against some of his junior officers. So right off the bat, the thing isn't going all that well. Then Gibbon gets into the field, and Gibbon's got really a hard job because, as I said, he's got cavalry with him, but it's a lot of slow-moving infantry too. As we said, if you've ever been out into Montana, this guy's basically got to patrol the Yellowstone River with 400 guys.
Yeah.
And, Indians are really just kind of slipping around him left, right, and center, kind of making a mockery of kind of the whole expedition. Gibbon is going to be criticized for really not being able to maintain steady and accurate reconnaissance on the Indian village. Okay. And at one point in mid-May, I think some of his scouts see an Indian village, and Gibbon, for whatever reason that we still kind of debate today, doesn't report that intelligence to Terry. Okay. So Gibbon, Colonel Gibbon is not the John Gibbon we know of 1863. He's a little bit older. He's a little bit slower. Some wounds are slowing him down kind of thing. And what I think you see in a lot of accounts from the Montana column, diaries and letters and things of that sort of thing, is they don't seem to feel like Colonel Gibbon is exhibiting a lot of energy and vigor in his assignment here.
Yeah.
So that's not going well. Last but not least, Crook comes back into the field June 17th at the Battle of the Rosebud. He is in camp morning of the 17th. Warriors basically come out from their villages and attack him, which, by Army standards is almost unheard of.
Right.
Because, the Army's got this mindset that the Indians are just going to run and just going to scatter.
Yeah.
So the idea that the Indians kind of take the fight to the Army is kind of startling to these guys.
Which that notion of them running, where does that come from? Because I don't know of frightened Indian stories.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot about that too. There's definitely some of it is definitely cultural bias.
Okay.
The mentality of the Army and our tactics and our weaponry.
Sure.
Can take on 3 times our number against these savage foes and that sort of thing. So there's a general cultural bias against that. Custer had experienced some of this in the 1867 expedition with Winfield Hancock, another Gettysburg veteran, where they spent the summer kind of crisscrossing Kansas and Colorado or that looking for Indians. But to your point, there's you could also look at something like the Fetterman Massacre, where up until the time of the Custer Massacre,
this was a big deal.
This was a big deal kind of thing. And, clearly the Indians, when pushed, would fight back. So
Sure.
it's I think, again, it's really a lot of cultural bias within the Army against it. And it almost becomes an obsession. We got to bring the Indians to battle because they're going to scatter. Don't let them scatter.
Yeah.
Don't let them get away, sort of thing. And that really becomes the operative mindset throughout the campaign.
I mean, I'm no expert on Native American history, but I mean, everything that I've ever read or heard about, it seems to me that when the Indians run, it's because they have an ambush set up and they want you to chase them.
Exactly. Decoy.
Or they have accomplished what they've come to do and they're done. Like, there is no last man on the field is the winner. That's a European thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think, I think with the Indians, too, they were loath to take casualties. They would not, a Civil War style, frontal assault kind of thing. Indians would try to avoid that. They were loath to take casualties. But to your point, I think when they had scored enough honor, counted coup on their enemy, or things of that nature, or just had accomplished what they needed to accomplish, then they would scatter. And I think in some corners of the Army, that's kind of mistaken as they're cowards and they're going to run.
Right.
Get them, they're going to run kind of thing. And especially what I think the Army underestimates in the 1876 campaign is, the Warriors are not going to flee and leave their families behind.
Right.
So what we'll see when Custer kind of comes into this village is it's not just the Warriors we're dealing with, but, they've got their women and children. And, as we'll find out, they're going to fight to defend it.
Hell yeah. So you mentioned something also before, which I want to get into now before I forget when we get further into the regiment. You're talking about the arrogance of the American culture, and we've got the better weapons and everything like that. Yeah. But do they, Jim? Do they have the better weapons?
Well, they think they do. Should we go into the weaponry?
Yes, let's go into the weaponry, because this is, I think, one big factor into Custer's defeat.
Yeah. So the standard issue with the Army is the 1873 Springfield single shot carbine, right? And that was a weapon that had been adopted by the Army after study. Again, it's not, we kind of read this stuff today and go, oh, the stupid Army, why did they have these single shotguns?
Right.
Well, they had put a commission in place, of which Alfred Terry and Marcus Reno were both a part of, but they had, put this commission in place, and they felt for campaigning out west where you needed range, where you were more likely to fight at long distances, where you were going to have difficulty arming troops in the field, for that and other reasons, the Army felt that the single shot was preferable to arming all of these guys with repeating rifles. So that's, and obviously when we get to the Little Bighorn battle is your kind of foreshadowing here. That's going to play a factor.
So when we get there, let's make sure we remember to bring up what the problem is with that stuff.
I was just going to say, and meanwhile, though, you have warriors basically being armed by post traders.
With Winchesters.
With Henry, repeating rifles, kind of everything under the sun. But, we'll come back to it, I think, probably when we actually start fighting.
Yeah. Okay, so the expedition kicks off when? What?
So the Terry Custer column finally gets into the field in mid-May. And, so through the month of May, they're coming out of Dakota territory. They are moving west into, what is Montana territory, and ultimately going to find the battle.
And for the purposes of what we're doing here, we're just going to focus from now on the Terry column there, because that's where Custer is, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, actually, no. Is that true? Isn't it Terry, Custer, Gibbon when they all leave from the same point, don't they?
Well, so here's kind of what happens. So Crook is turned back on June 17th. Mm-hmm. Battle of the Rosebud. You can call it an Indian victory. You can call it a tactical stalemate, whatever. But Crook basically at that point withdraws from the field and is more or less going to be out of the campaign. But what happens now is Terry and Custer get into Montana territory. They are going to link up at one point with Gibbon, a kind of supply depot along the Yellowstone River. And this is kind of important because it does kind of play into the battle. Mid-June, Major Marcus Reno, who is Custer's nominal second in command, leads a scouting expedition that picks up the Indian Trail moving south along what is called Rosebud Creek. Mm-hmm. Now, Reno does not follow the trail the whole way. He's not supposed to, and he doesn't, although later he was both criticized by Terry and Custer for disobeying some orders. But in any event, Reno kind of picks up a trail moving down Rosebud Creek.
Right.
So June 21st, Terry gets together with Custer, Gibbon, some of the other officers, and they hatch a plan. What's the plan? They basically say, okay, we're going to cut Custer and the 7th Cavalry loose from the Terry expedition. You're going to continue to follow the trail along the Rosebud. And as the orders were sort of written, Terry basically says to the effect of, look, I have too much confidence in you, in your energy, in your zeal to impose too precise of an order upon you should you come in contact with the enemy. But this is what I think you should do, and I want you to do this, unless reasons dictate otherwise. And what Terry says to Custer is if the Indian Trail turns into the valley of the Little Bighorn. If the Indian Trail turns into the Valley of the Little Bighorn, he wants Custer to still proceed a little bit further south to make sure the Indians have not passed around his flank before kind of coming up north into the Little Bighorn Valley. Terry, meanwhile, is going to continue along the Yellowstone with Gibbon. Terry's now going to join Gibbon's column, and with, again, some companies of the 2nd Cavalry, couple infantry regiments. They're going to come down the Yellowstone and the Bighorn River and kind of now come into the Little Bighorn Valley from the north. Okay, so you see where we're going here?
Yeah.
So Terry and Gibbon are going to come in from the north. Custer's going to come in from the south.
Now, this is the same Rosebud that Crook was on, right?
It was just a little bit further. Okay. Yeah, but it's the same creek. So, on the day Crook fought the battle, Reno's scout was only like 50 miles away from him, which, out west, 50 miles is nothing.
Right.
But, back to sort of this idea of Terry and Gibbon coming in from the north and Custer coming in from the south. Terry's communications at the time basically says to the effect that it is hoped that with us coming in from the north and the south, the Indians will be enclosed and will escape, or will not escape. They will basically have them trapped and they won't escape. Later on, that sort of gets morphed into, we had an agreement to meet in the Little Bighorn Valley on June 26th. So kind of a very non-specific sort of, we'll get them from two directions, gets translated later into, well, Custer knew we were going to be here on the 26th, and he should have waited until the 26th. And, he kind of disobeyed orders by attacking a day early, which, starts part of the great controversy.
Because that's the 26th. Is when Terry arrived, right?
Yeah, well, Terry...
Or was it the 27th?
Well, Terry and Gibbon kind of get into the Little Bighorn Valley by the afternoon or the evening of the 26th.
Okay.
So even if you go by Terry's timeline of the 26th, he is late.
He's late, yeah.
He's late, and they do some hellacious marching to get there, some of which is due to Terry kind of sending him over a bad route. But ultimately, Terry won't really get into position when he comes in and rescues Reno's guys on the 27th.
Okay. So let's get into the personages, not necessarily the Gettysburg ones only, all of them that are going to play a role in the battle of the Little Bighorn. You got, of course, Custer.
Yeah.
And I'm just talking in the 7th. You mentioned Reno, Major Marcus Reno.
Yeah.
Who is he? And
so Major Marcus Reno, he was an Illinois native, although he spent, here's a Gettysburg connection. He really spent much of his adult life in the Harrisburg area. He had married into a prominent Harrisburg family. His wife had died, making him a widower. But during the Civil War, Reno, had a good career, had a good record in the Civil War. He was primarily staff officer, although he did get colonelcy of a regiment very late in the game. But he was primarily a staff officer during the Civil War, had a good record in that regard. But by the summer of 1876, he is basically the second senior officer of the 7th Cavalry in the field. He is not what becomes known in the regiment. He's not part of the Custer clan. So part of what's going into this is the 7th has become a very cliquish, not unlike Gettysburg, right? We got all our little cliques, and you know what I'm talking about. The 7th Cavalry's become very sort of cliquish. Reno is kind of on the outside of that, but as we'll see on the afternoon of June 25th, is going to play a very important part in the attack plan.
I've always known that there are two camps. There's the Custer clan, and then there's the non-Custer people. But is there a third where they just don't give a shit either way?
Yeah, there probably is.
Okay.
There probably is. The Custer clan and the non-Custer clan gets all the press from the historians. But there are a couple officers who are neutral. The non-Custer clan is probably best epitomized by Captain Frederick Benteen.
So that was the next guy I wanted to get into. So go ahead, Captain Benteen.
Yeah, so he's another Civil War veteran, served in Missouri Cavalry during the late unpleasantness kind of thing. But Benteen is give or take about 10 years older than Custer. He's kind of got this long flowing white hair kind of thing. But Benteen, pretty much when he gets assigned to the 7th Cavalry, pretty much hates Custer on sight. He just feels like Custer is a braggart, and just kind of gets turned off to Custer on sight. At the Battle of the Washita in 68, when Custer had successfully, destroyed Black Kettle's village, a detachment of soldiers at the Washita had, under Major Joel Elliott, had basically gone off and had gotten surrounded and gotten killed. Benteen felt that Custer did not do his part to ascertain the fate of Major Elliott, and that just sort of accelerated. Accelerated a rift that I think was already there.
Because Benteen wanted to go and try to rescue him because he didn't know he got wiped out right away, right?
Well, they didn't know he got wiped out, but Benteen seems to have been a friend of Elliott, but what happens is after the campaign, Benteen sends a letter to a friend that ends up in a St. Louis newspaper that, kind of ridicules Custer and says, what happened to Major Elliott? We don't even find out about him. And, Custer, as the story goes, Custer, basically said, whoever wrote this article, I'm going to beat within an inch of their life.
Horsewhip him within an inch of his life.
Benteen goes, well, it was me. And, Custer stammers and goes, we'll see you later. Kind of thing. And
I never understood that.
Yeah.
Because he seemed like, was it maybe because he had some kind of respect for Benteen? What was that about?
Well, as Benteen would tell you, Custer had a lot of respect for Benteen, kind of thing. Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of different theories on this. One of the things they'll say about Custer is that even though he was aware that guys like Benteen hated him. Reno, I don't know that Reno hated Custer, but he probably didn't like him none too much.
Yeah.
But what they would say is that Custer, even though he knew these guys didn't like him, wouldn't let that kind of interfere in his management of the regiment. And, kind of wouldn't let that get in the way of the, the spirit decorum.
Yeah, he didn't take it personally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, he would pretty much, when they were at Fort Lincoln, he would pretty much assign guys he didn't like, to faraway posts,
Sure.
to keep his tight little Custer clan close by.
Okay, so you have Custer, Reno, who's is third in command but second in command in the field.
Yeah.
Benteen would be third.
Benteen's the senior
He's
captain.
the senior captain.
Yep.
Now you got some other captains that we got to deal with here.
Yeah.
One of them is Tom Custer, the brother of George.
Yep. So Tom Custer on this campaign is going to be commanding C Company. And Tom Custer, another Civil War veteran, had served in Ohio infantry early in the war, but then later in the war got assigned to his, general brother's staff. And, by all accounts, a man of great bravery. Two-time Medal of Honor recipient during the Civil War for flag captures, and at the time was said to be the first one to receive two Medals of Honor.
And at least in the movie version of Son of the Morning Star, there's a couple of scenes where Tom questions George's decision, and George says, maybe you should have been the general.
Yeah.
And he says, I didn't have to be. I won all the medals.
I won all the medals, exactly.
Now, was that a real little...
Yeah, I think that is legit. I think, some banter between the two. These are two just sort of raw-boned, rough-house kids from Ohio,
They love practical jokes.
Exactly. Like if we were George and Tom right now, I might put you in a headlock and kind of, give
and
you
try to get whatever's left of my hair off.
And, there's just kind of stuff.
Well, I was just reading one, their younger brother, Boston, was with them.
Yeah.
And he had stopped. They were all riding ahead of the column or something. He had stopped to get a stone out of the hoof of his horse, and so Tom and George raced up ahead and got up on a cliff or something and shot over his head, and he hopped on the horse and ran back for help, thinking it was an Indian attack. I mean, that's serious pranking.
Exactly. Those crazy Custer hijinks, right? Let's just shoot at
my brother.
Shoot at the little brother a little bit and scare the hell out of him.
But but that's the way they were.
Tight, very tight knit family. Tom Custer, you mentioned Boston Custer. They're going to have a brother-in-law with them. Lieutenant James Calhoun is going to be commanding L Company. Calhoun is married to the Custer sister. And last but not least, they're going to even have a nephew, a young 18-year-old nephew by the name of Audie Reed with them. So
now he's not in the service though. He's just along, right?
Exactly. Just Audie and Boston. They've just basically got them jobs as trail guides, forage masters.
Okay. Boston's not in the service
Correct,
either. It's
correct.
Okay. So it's both of them. Okay. So you mentioned Calhoun. Now here's one of the guys that was here, right? Miles Keogh.
Yeah. Good old lovable Miles Keogh, right?
Yes.
So we should talk about Keogh. So Keogh is an Irish immigrant. He had been what we would kind of consider to be a soldier of fortune. 1860, 1861, he had served in the Papal Army and the Vatican Guard, where he had received a couple of commendations. But in 1862, he had immigrated to the United States and joined our Civil War.
Yes.
Where he primarily spent most of the Civil War on staff assignments. And again, highly regarded, seemingly well liked by everyone, that he served under in the Civil War, but most probably famously known because at the Battle of Gettysburg, he was a captain on the staff of John Buford.
Yes.
And, he was among one of the staff officers that Buford credited, at the Battle of Gettysburg for bringing me clear-headed intelligence and stuff like that. So when Buford's doing the keep a clear eye, he's probably talking to Keogh.
And it's Keogh that's going and doing it.
Yeah.
wasn't he cradling Buford's head when he died?
Yeah, when Buford, to show you the kind of relationship they had. Yeah, when Buford died, Keogh's right there holding on to him.
So there you go, folks.
Yeah.
Keogh was on his staff, and when he died, he was there holding him. And then he died at the Little Bighorn.
And as we always say in our podcast, doesn't everybody like John Buford?
How could you not?
Do we listen like that? So there's your your heartwarming Buford story.
Well, Tim Smith might not like John Buford.
Oh, is that because it's cavalry?
Yeah, because it's cavalry, and he doesn't know what the big deal is. But I think if there is one cavalry guy, he'll give some credit to.
Even Tim respects.
It's Buford. Yeah.
So.
Okay, so Miles. Now, am I thinking? I mean, I know there are more captains, but as far as the big names that we need to think of,
let me give you one more.
Go ahead.
Let me give you one more because he's another Gettysburg veteran, George Yates.
Okay.
Now, George Yates is not a guy that we normally think of when we think of Gettysburg and the Civil War or that sort of thing. But at the Battle of Gettysburg and really more or less to the end of the Civil War, Yates was a staff officer under under Alfred Pleasanton.
Okay.
So yeah, George,
yeah.
Under General Alfred Pleasanton, Yates was serving on Pleasanton's staff.
All right.
Now, Yates had bumped into Custer in Monroe, Michigan, I think late winter of 62, 63, and so Yates and Custer were friends.
All right.
So again, after the Civil War and by the time of the Battle of Little Bighorn, Yates is commanding Company F, which is going to be again assigned to Custer during during the final battle kind of thing. So I'll throw out George Yates as probably another one that we want to know. He's a Gettysburg veteran, highly regarded by Custer, and he's going to be there right at the end.
So another contingency of people that we have in the 7th Cavalry are the Scouts.
Yeah.
And they are interesting in this. They're an interesting part of the story. What are they? Crow,
mostly Crow and Arikara Scouts as well. Yeah,
and then a couple of Americans.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, interpreters and things like that. Yeah.
So, talk a little bit about the Scouts and the.
Okay. I mean, sure we can. So, as we said again, Crow and Arikara Scouts. The majority of where the Battle of Little Bighorn is fought was ancestral Crow land. The Crow and the Sioux were mortal enemies. All the Indian tribes getting along with each other and living off the land and stuff like that.
And then the white man came.
Until the white man came, exactly.
Yeah.
And so again, if you want to get deeper into history, that's not true. And
well, just on that point there, though, I meant to bring this up before when we were talking about the Black Hills.
Yeah.
I had read somewhere, and I don't remember if it's true or not, but the Black Hills we think of now as sacred Sioux land that we stole. The Sioux only had it for about 40 or 45 years before we stole it because they stole it from the Cheyenne, is what I heard. Do you know if that's true?
I'd have to go back and look to see where the Sioux laid claim to it or that. But it does bring up the point. What's the famous quote? The Cheyenne did the fighting, the Crow got the land, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But so what you've got though, to that point, what you've got is you've got the Crow, basically realizing their more aggressive cousins, the Sioux and the Cheyenne, are, going to be in the field this summer. So they're agreeing to basically scout for the army to, and they know the land,
right?
Which you would hope would play into Custer's favor. So,
and they probably know how to read certain signs and clues left behind, right?
Exactly. So is the 7th, June 22nd, when Custer is let loose and they're following this Indian trail that Reno has discovered. They're following it along the Rosebud River. Custer's got a full contingent of scouts out in front of him. And what the scouts are basically saying, as they're watching more and more kind of satellite Indian trails come into this, the scouts are increasingly saying, this is a big trail. This is, this is a big village.
Yeah.
Too many Indians for you, General.
Otasu
kind of thing. Yeah, many Sioux kind of things. So obviously that's going to play a factor in how the battle unfolds on the 25th.
So we've got the Indian Scouts. We've got these cliques in the officer corps in the 7th Cavalry. they're on their way. They've split up from the column.
Yeah.
Okay. They're on the Rosebud. They're scouting, but was part of sending Custer out there to kind of get him a little further, basically to give the infantry time to get to the Indians a little bit before or on time?
That's debated.
Okay.
And that's part of the great debate. And you know, folks, why guys like us are into this topic is because there's so many controversies and debates. Certainly and this goes back to our conversation earlier, but certainly when Custer and the 7th are let loose from Terry and Gibbon, it is clearly understood that Custer and the 7th are the mobile strike force. Mm-hmm. And if they run into a village, they're probably going to go for it. Even to the point where, some of Gibbon's guys are disappointed because they're like, Custer's going to get there first. We're not going to get in on the big kill kind of thing. So there's no doubt that Custer is the A-team kind of going out there. But to your question, that goes back to what I said earlier. Later on, Terry, his staff officers, his supporters, Gibbon, kind of elaborate on this idea that we needed Custer to go farther south to give the infantry time to get into the valley on the 26th. But again, you can debate whether or not that was part of the original plan.
Yeah, that could be a post-disaster excuse.
Yeah, and so Terry's orders to Custer does say if the trail turns towards the Little Horn, which is what they call it,
right,
we still think you should proceed further to the south to make sure the Indians don't pass around your flank. So what you got to kind of ask yourself is what officer worth his salt? I mean, the goal is to find the Indians. Mm-hmm. What officer worth his salt is going to say, we got him. Okay, leave the trail. Let's go over there. The trail goes this way, but let's go that way. Who's going to do that? And certainly if Custer had done that and the village had gotten away, or if the village had moved north and manhandled Terry and Gibbon, who would you have blamed? You would have blamed Custer for not following the trail.
You can't win.
Yeah, literally can't win, right? But it's a difficult situation.
Yeah.
He's going to do what he thinks his best judgment is to do, and obviously we know the results are what they are.
I can't remember why, but in my head, the name Tulloch's Creek is okay. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so part of Terry's orders to Custer are to scout an expanse known as Tulloch's Creek.
Okay,
and one of the interpreters is basically assigned to Custer for the specific notion of go through, scout Tulloch's Creek, send a courier through, tell Terry what you find.
Okay,
so when they go by Tulloch's Creek, this particular guy goes up to Custer and says, "Hey, Tulloch's Creek, I got to go." And Custer just kind of looks at him and doesn't say anything. And eventually the guy goes back. Why is this important? It's clearly a portion of Terry's orders to Custer that Custer seems to ignore.
Uh-huh.
And you can argue whether or not Terry had gotten that intelligence might have changed Terry's movements and perhaps would have gotten him into the Little Bighorn Valley earlier.
Okay. So as they're progressing, and there's this big, huge Indian trail.
Yeah.
And Custer wants to follow it.
And he's following it carefully. June 22nd, 23rd, 24th. He's not hell-bent for leather. All 3 of those days, they cover maybe a 2-mile-an-hour, 3-mile-an-hour pace. Him and the scouts, they're being very thorough. They're following the trail. They're scouting left, right, and center to make sure nobody gets away.
So it's not this race to get there first.
Exactly. It's not crazy man Custer, galloping ahead and pushing the troops, which is what history often tells us.
Yeah. But they get to a point where it kind of does become a race, and it's all a mistake, basically, right?
Yeah.
What is this?
Well, so the night of the 24th, June 24th, into the morning of June 25th. By that point, it is obvious that the trail does turn towards the Little Bighorn Valley. Custer sends some scouts ahead to a prominent point on the divide known as the Crow's Nest, and the scouts come back and basically say to Custer, big village in the Little Bighorn Valley, we can see him down there. Custer pushes the regiment forward at night, the famous night march of June 24th, June 25th, pushes the regiment forward to try to get them them to the divide between the Rosebud and the Little Bighorn. He's trying to get them there by daylight. And what he says to the scouts afterwards is, we're going to hole up the regiment here. We'll do some reconnaissance work, and we will attack on the morning of the 26th, which, you could argue is he's trying to replay the playbook from the Washita, surround the village at night and attack. That doesn't quite, though, play out. In part, he goes up to the crow's nest, and he says he can't see the village.
Right.
And they say, well, look for smoke on the horizon, look for a big pony herd on the bluffs, looks like worms in the grass kind of thing. But he says he can't see the village. So, you've got a little bit of a challenge here, like, okay, does he have target definition or not? But he comes down and he says, I'm going to stick to my plan. We're going to hole up overnight. We're going to attack on the morning of the 26th.
Now, wait.
Yeah.
You've been out there.
Yeah.
How far is the crow's nest from the village?
Yeah, so depending on what part of the village you're looking at, the crow's nest is about 12 miles away, and if you're looking more in the northern end of the valley, as far away as 15 miles. I'll be honest, I've been up to the crow's nest. I've been up there in the morning. I've been up there with more experienced Western guides. I couldn't see anything.
Are you looking in field glasses too?
Yeah. So what you would look for today is obviously you look for things that don't belong.
Oh, sure.
See that shiny obelisk on the horizon? That's the monument, at Last Stand Hill. But what they were looking for in 1876 was motion. Motion of the huge horse herd. The morning smoke. From
Smoke, you wouldn't be able to see that?
Exactly. And Lieutenant Varnum, who was an officer who was Custer's chief of scouts, basically said, look, we'd been riding, dust, our eyes were inflamed, we didn't have any sleep, it's possible.
See, again, it always comes back to these very practical, very real little things.
Exactly.
Like inflamed eyes.
Exactly. Get your sleep, people. That's right. Right?
No, we interviewed the guys who wrote an environmental history of the Civil War. Have you read that book yet?
I haven't read that yet.
You got to get it.
Do I got to get that?
Oh,
Okay.
it's fantastic. Because it's all the stuff that aren't in the general histories. They're not even in a lot of like the micro histories. It's just like shit. Where did it go? What did you do with like that stuff, right? But it's very real things that you can't avoid,
that people and that we don't think of when we're reading a book.
No.
We're looking at troop dispositions on maps and why didn't they attack here and there and
like they're toys. But they're people who have to go to the bathroom and
stuff like that.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So Custer can't see this stuff out there, and they're like, well, it's out there. They can see it. And he goes, yeah. He goes back.
Right.
Goes back to the regiment. He's still going to do his plan, but what foils it?
Exactly. So what happens is, and this is a little myth busting, because what you always hear is Custer didn't listen to the scouts, and up to a point that's true. They were pessimistic. They were telling him, don't attack the village, it's too big, kind of thing. But at this point, they see some Indians, the scouts see some Indians, a couple guys leading horses kind of thing, and they go, we've been spotted. A detachment from Company F goes back to find a box of hardtack that had been dropped. Some Indians are rifling through it. We've been spotted. Right. And so now Custer's getting it going, you can't wait. You've been spotted. This is a bad plan. And, the myth busting here is really, it's the scouts who talk him out of waiting to attack on the 26th. It's the scouts who convince him you've been spotted and you got to go forward now. Right. And, that's going to set off the chain of events that's going to lead to the last stand.
And the funny thing is that I read, and tell me if this is true, the Indians that they saw rooting around the hardtack box were leaving the area. They weren't going to the village.
Exactly. There's no indication that these were, scouts or any advance warning from the village.
They probably were just like, I'm sick of these people. Let's go do our own thing.
Or if they had turned around and, gotten to the village, who knows what would have happened with that. But it wasn't like any of these Indians went immediately back to the village and said, soldiers.
Right.
Which, tells you that when Custer does get the regiment moving towards the village, one thing he still affects is an element of surprise. He does at least if nothing else, he does surprise them.
Right. So let's get there then. So let's get the regiment out there across the valley. So they're moving out. Now this plan, Custer has employed before. I mean the basic plan. I mean, like the splitting your
come into the village from multiple directions.
Yeah. Surrounding,
Yeah.
And it's worked, but they were asleep.
Yeah.
It was
Middle
winter.
of night.
Yeah, middle of the night.
Right.
I mean, the name of this book that I have in front of me is Son of the Morning Star. Where does he get that name?
Right. When they named it from that, and so you're right about all of that. I think up to a point. I think so. What Custer decides to do is he's basically going to split the command into 4 detachments. Right. Custer's going to take 5 companies, which will include who we talked about earlier, Keogh and Yates. And Tom Custer,
Calhoun too,
and Calhoun. So that there'll be 5 companies there. We might as well throw in the Gray Horse troops since they're the only one we haven't mentioned under Lieutenant Smith. But Custer's going to go ahead with 5 companies. He's going to send Benteen with 3 companies off on kind of a left oblique to kind of go scouting up the valley to basically say, look, go up to that ridge line up there, look into the valley, see if you see any Indians. If you don't see any Indians, go to the next ridge line. Eventually, and again, this is another gray area that's open, for argument, but eventually then he's also told, okay, at some point though, Benteen, you got to report back what you've seen and come back to the trail. But for now, that's going to take Benteen and 3 companies out of the picture.
Like how far are we talking?
Ultimately they probably do a round trip of about 7.5 miles. That's going to take him off the main trail.
Okay.
Which, might not sound like a lot, but it's rough country, and the horses
takes a long time.
It's going to take a lot for the horses. So ultimately, Benteen's going to fall an hour or more behind the rest of the guys. Okay. So Reno, with 3 companies, is eventually going to be ordered to charge the village. Now, they pass basically a landmark that is known today in Custer lore as the Lone Teepee. And one of the white, scout interpreters, a guy by the name of Gerard, supposedly climbs some bluffs and says to Custer, there goes your Indians, General, running like the devil.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And so what I think that tells Custer is the village is on the run.
But who are these Indians that are running like the devil?
Well, that's a debate. There are some authors who think there was a little satellite village at this Lone Teepee, and there might be, they might see as many as 50 Indians kind of moving away from that. Other guys think maybe it's just dust clouds in the Little Bighorn Valley. Gerard sees the dust, and he says, there they go, they're running.
Okay. So
it's
we
open
don't really
for debate.
know.
It's open for debate.
Okay.
But the important thing, I think, is Reno with 3 companies is basically then told the village is about 2 miles away from you and on the run. Charge them at a gate, at as rapid a gate as you deem prudent, and you'll be supported by the whole regiment. Okay?
Yeah, now that is a phrase that also is up for debate or causes confusion with Reno or something like that?
Reno is more or less consistent in his report and then some of his later testimony. He changes the words a little bit, but I think his earliest version, that's more or less the exact words that he uses. But
he takes it to mean. But
what he says he takes it to mean is he assumes the whole regiment's going to kind of come in right behind him.
Which I would too. I mean, what do you think? How would you interpret it differently?
I don't know. It's, again, it's another part of the great debate, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't there, but yeah, Reno's given to believe that they're going to come in behind him. As we know, Custer with his 5 companies, instead of coming in behind Reno, is going to basically ride up the bluffs on the east side of the Little Bighorn River, continue north, and, gonna, for a little while, take Custer's 5 companies totally out of the fight. So when Reno charges into this mass of Indians that are not running away, but are basically coming down to protect their village, Reno's kind of like, looking over his shoulder going,
where's the rest of the command? Yeah.
Where's the support?
And then he sees eventually Custer up on the ridge waving his hat, doesn't he?
Well, that's open for debate. Some of Reno's guys say that, they can see Custer's command up on the bluffs. One guy, DeRudio in particular, says, I can see Custer waving the hat. Again, people have said, you can see that. No, you can't, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
But I think there are enough reports to indicate that, at least some of the guys in Reno's column saw Custer riding up on the bluffs and at least had an indication of what direction he was going in.
Now you've been there. I've only seen it in pictures and video, and so explain to us when Reno. What is he on the south side of the village? Or
Reno's coming up the south end of the village.
What is the terrain like that he's got to cross to get there?
Yeah. So Reno's basically got to cross to the west side of the Little Bighorn River.
So he's got to cross the river.
Yeah. Because initially him and Custer, for a while, they're both on the east side of the river. But you find a ford, you cross the river. That the ground that Reno charges up is generally speaking a wide open plain.
Okay.
It's been very corrupted today by a highway that runs through it and all that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That sucks. I know.
But I think out there they'd be able to.
You would think, right? Just put the highway somewhere else, right? But,
right.
But it's generally a wide open plain. But on Reno's right flank would basically be the timber of the Little Bighorn River.
Right.
And so the Little Bighorn River is a very looping. So you can't think
it's
of
not straight.
Right. You can't think of it straight. It's very looping and that. So as Reno's riding, at times these loops and these timber bends are going to basically cut off his view of the Indian village. So
okay.
So it's not like he's coming up the valley and can see this huge village in front of him, probably literally until the last minute.
All right.
Then when he gets within 100 yards of it, he realizes the Indians are not running, and in fact, warriors are coming out to meet him, which is when he makes one of his controversial decisions. He dismounts and forms a skirmish line. And
so
at that point, you're going from offense to defense.
He dismounts and forms a right. Okay, you've lost the initiative.
Right.
Because he's charging in, isn't he?
Right.
And now, so he halts the line, dismount, form skirmishers. They form skirmishers, and then what happens?
Yeah. So first of all,
Reno.
Yeah, whatever you think of Reno's tactics, let me just throw a couple things out here. He's coming into that valley with something like 120 guys. He's facing, at least at this point, hundreds of warriors that may at some point turn into thousands of warriors.
Right.
But he's already outnumbered. Reno doesn't have Indian fighting experience of his own. But a lot of the critics will say he was a drunken coward, and he was drunk. He was a coward, or he was both, and that sort of influenced his tactics. So you said poor Reno. I think I would agree with you on poor Reno. The guy's in a hell of a spot.
Yeah,
he's badly outnumbered, and again, your mindset of you're going to chase a fleeing enemy has just gotten thrown out the window. They're not fleeing; they're coming out to meet you. So what happens? He gets on the skirmish line. You know your tactics, right? Civil War, 1876, it hasn't changed.
Right.
Every fourth man goes back to hold the horses. Now
you're down to 100 men or so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now you've lost 25% of your manpower. So what do? So they fight on the skirmish line. Maybe for about, again, there are guys who have done precise timelines on all of this. They're maybe on the skirmish line for 20 minutes or so. But eventually what I think you start to see is there's a timber along a dry part of the creek, the riverbed behind them, and you start to see more and more guys kind of going back into the timber.
Makes sense.
Kind of creeping off the skirmish line here. So they fall off the skirmish line, and they take a defensive position in some wooded timber that was behind them.
Cottonwoods? Is that what
probably.
they were?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the trees are here at Gettysburg.
I think I just mentioned cottonwoods in the book. That's why I had it in my head.
Somebody asked me at Gettysburg, what kind of tree is that? I say, I don't know. Ask a ranger.
It's a wooden tree.
Yeah, it's a tree.
Yeah, what do I know?
It's an oak tree. I know oak trees.
Right, ask a ranger.
Ask a ranger. That could be
that's
a new
their
installment.
job. Yeah.
Yeah. Ask a ranger.
Yeah.
All right. So, anyways, where were we?
So they go into the woods.
Right. So they go into the woods. Now, by this point, again, whether you agree with Reno's tactics or not, clearly any initiative is lost. And being close enough to threaten the village, obviously they're getting a lot of attention from the warriors. There's a fear that warriors are going to basically infiltrate the woods, get in on their flank, get in behind them, got to do something. So there's a famous story that Custer's favorite scout bloody knife is with Reno.
Yes.
And Reno is trying to get through sign language, what are the Indians going to do kind of thing. A couple of bullets, a volley comes crashing into the timber, kills one enlisted man, but also hits Bloody Knife in the head and supposedly splatters his blood and his brains all over Reno. It's a popular story. A lot of people think, the sight of this basically sends Reno into a panic. He orders the guys to dismount,
right.
mount again kind of thing. I think that's been overplayed in the Custer literature, so I'll throw out another myth bust here. Again, I can't prove it, but I don't think Reno would have been as bothered by that as
because he would have seen it before.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. He certainly saw his share of blood in the Civil War.
Has he? Do you know? Has he, in his service during the Civil War or out on the plains, had he ever been in a situation where he was as outnumbered?
Not as hot as this one.
Okay,
so if you want to argue the other point of it, he's
Yeah.
certainly in unfamiliar territory. And you've got screaming Indians all over the place, which is going to unnerve any soldier.
And then not only that, but if I'm getting the geography right here or the topography right, the timber is right along the banks of the creek.
Right,
the river. But this isn't where he forded. So in other words,
correct.
It's not easily. So basically, you're up against a wall unless you want to really have a hard time.
You're right. So he's kind of got he's got kind of this dry creek bed, which he's kind of setting up as a defensive position. You've got a glade behind you where you're kind of holding the horses, and then you've got the active channel of the river behind you about that. So he kind of can't go anywhere.
Right.
He kind of can't go anywhere. But now with the fear that I think Indians are infiltrating the woods, he makes a critical decision. He has the guys mount up, and again, depending on what account you want to believe, a popular one is, he says, those of you who wish to make your escape, follow me, which, whatever you think of Reno, that's not inspirational leadership kind of thing. But he later called it a charge. He said, I'm charging the Indians, and I'm going to lead the charge kind of thing. But he leads this charge out of the timber, initially back towards where he tried to ford the river. But now you've got so many Indians around you. He's kind of pushed over to the left. He's going to find another place that is not nearly as crossable, but he's going to get across the river.
Okay.
So if you want to criticize Reno for anything, this is probably the easiest point to do it. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of command and control when they're on the skirmish line, but there really seems to be none whatsoever when they're in the timber.
Yeah.
And what you see afterwards is a lot of guys going, what? We left? Where's my horse? Kind of thing. Really guys kind of being left to their own hook, and no management of this, no rear guard or anything like that. It's literally just imagine 100 cavalrymen going pell-mell out of the woods, trying to get to safety.
Got to be terrifying.
Yeah, and the Indians treat it like a buffalo hunt, pumping bullets into them, and this is really where Reno suffers most of his casualties. Not on the skirmish line, not on the woods, but in trying to get across the river is where he suffers most of his losses.
Now, meanwhile, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you before when you said Benteen was sent off there to the left. Does he have the mule train with him too?
No, so we didn't talk about the mule train, the pack train, but the 4th Division of Custer's command was one company and some additional attachments with the slow-moving pack train. So you got your supplies and your ammunition and that. So they've fallen behind. They're even behind Benteen at this point.
Okay, so they're bringing up the rear. They're like way back.
Right.
Okay.
Which is kind of standard, and you kind of expect that.
Sure.
It happened at the Washita, and it's happening again here. But again, it'll play into some of the further
right. That's why I wanted to introduce them. Okay, so Reno is getting back across the river. Meanwhile, what's Custer doing while this is going on?
So pretty much everything at this point is all open for debate. He rode along the bluffs along the east side of the river, at least for some point. Some of the scouts who said they were still with him, Giovanni Martini, who is credited with carrying the last message back. He said, Martini says they basically stopped for a while and observed the village, and it was basically quiet. And Martini said, the officers are studying it. They're trying to understand where everyone is. They think maybe the warriors Custers have gone out buffalo hunting, which, if you take all of this literally, Custer supposedly says to the guys, hurrah, we caught them napping.
Right.
We're going, they're out buffalo hunting, they're sleeping, whatever they're doing, we caught them napping, let's finish this up and return home. So Custer and again, some hardcore guys are going to beat me up for the route because we don't really know which way they went, but kind of proceed along in a draw up to a potential crossing known as Medicine Tail Coulee, where is really the next fordable point to get to the Little Bighorn, to get across the Little Bighorn River. Yeah.
There's I'm sure you have that TV show. Have you seen that TV show where they can trace kind of the path based on bullets and buttons and things that they've found in the ground?
What the hell TV show is that? No, I haven't seen that one.
Are you joking?
No, I'm serious. Which one are we talking about? Is it one of these History Channel things?
It's an old one. It's got to be at least 10 or 15 years old by now.
Oh, you talking? Okay.
It's like Battlefield Detectives or something like that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was thinking. I was literally just watching. Did you see that thing on the History Channel where they were trying to find Custer's lost cache of weapons? That's the one I had in my head.
No.
Yeah. So the History Detectives. All this stuff that comes out of the archaeology of the mid '80s and and beyond and that sort of thing. Has helped formulate what we think Custer did, but at the end of the day, since nobody survived, nobody really knows what was going on in his head.
Sure. But I mean, we could kind of, according to this, they can trace the route that they took based on bullets and just dropped items and skulls or things like that.
Yeah, the archaeology, obviously the Indian testimony over the last 25 years or so has gotten a lot more a fairer shake, than it used to and that sort of thing. But at some point we know he sends Martini back with the famous last message. Benteen, and it's written by Adjutant W.W. Cook. Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs, P.S., bring packs.
Right.
And that's really all we know. Big village, come quick, bring the packs.
Right.
P.S. Bring packs.
It sounds kind of urgent to me.
It does. Now, again, some of the military guys will say, oh, no, that's standard. I don't know. I think that sounds pretty urgent to me, too. So he's seen a big village. He wants Benteen back on the trail, and he wants to bring the packs, which Benteen doesn't have. So that's kind of a problem.
So if Benteen were to come quick, and bring the packs, he'd have to wait for the packs to get up and then come quick.
Exactly.
Or send word to the packs, hurry up.
Yeah, bring some guys to just cut some of the ammunition packs loose and that sort of thing. Which ultimately that's going to create a dilemma for Benteen. But I think if you want to criticize Custer for something, a lot of his decisions have been rational based on what he knows. At the moment he knows it. But what I would say is, Reno has now been engaged anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour with really no contribution from Custer and the 5 companies.
Wait, Reno? It's that long?
Let's say 20 minutes on the skirmish line.
Okay.
Let's say another 20 minutes in the timber. However long it takes them to retreat to the bus.
Sure.
It's probably at least 45 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
With no contribution from the 5 companies.
Right. No support from the rest of the command.
Yeah. So when Custer gets to Medicine Tail Coulee, what we think he does is, he's got his 5 companies. We think he probably sends a couple companies down to the river. Towards the river to do a little bit of recon work, possibly to test for a crossing, possibly to draw pressure off of Reno. Again, we don't really know. I don't think these companies get to the river, even though one of the great Little Bighorn myths is that Custer goes to the river and gets shot and killed. Which is another round of myth busting we should probably do.
Okay. Yeah.
But a couple companies maybe get within a quarter mile of the river, so maybe a little bit closer, and they are pulled back, and we don't know why. Again, They don't seem to meet heavy resistance, but they meet heavy enough resistance. So again, with the aforementioned archaeology and Indian accounts, we kind of think, a couple companies pull back from the river, a couple companies are staying more on higher ground back from the river, but they're gonna ride, another half, 3/4 of a mile or so, and reunite at a point today that we refer to as Calhoun Hill.
Calhoun Hill. Okay.
Yeah, because at that point, Lieutenant Calhoun and Company L appear to be dropped off here as some sort of rearguard action. Are they a rear guard to protect Custer's further movements? Are they basically there to keep the back door open for Benteen, who's got to be coming? We told Benteen to come on. Boston Custer had rode up to the general's column and had passed Benteen. I mean, we think Benteen's got to be coming.
Yeah.
So is he waiting for, Benteen? Again, we can speculate, but we don't know. But what does seem to happen is Keogh. Keogh at this point, we think, has command of three of the 5 companies, basically his own I company, Calhoun's L company, and C company, which would normally be Tom Custer's, but Tom is riding as an aide-de-camp to his brother.
Right,
out
okay.
there. So Keogh and 3 companies are left behind. We think Custer, Yates, and 2 companies basically continue north, we think looking for another river crossing. And, the theory today is that he's probably trying to bag the non-combatants who are fleeing north from the village and, congregating kind of in the river valley. I think, thinking of tactics, Custer's MO, and probably the best that he can hope for right now, I think that's a plausible theory.
Sure.
Again, some of the hardcore military guys don't like it, but I think it's plausible that he's trying to bag non-combatants at this point.
So he's thinking Reno is being successful.
Probably not, because one of the stories we think we have is, Mitch Boyer, who's one of the half-breed scouts with him, and Curly,
Curly,
the controversial,
The Three Stooges.
Mo and Larry and the other scouts. But we think Mitch Boyer and some of the scouts who are still with him have probably watched Reno's defeat from the bluffs.
So they've reported it to him.
And have reported to Custer that possibly Reno's been driven to this side of the
So
river.
Then I guess is the thinking then that the Warriors are down finishing off Reno or fighting with Reno still, and the non-combatants are going the other way?
Well, that could be. And one of the things we pretty much know is when Reno crosses back to the east side of the river,
right,
and finds a position to kind of rally on the bluffs on the east side of the river, almost as he gets up there, for the most part, the Warriors disappear. This is Custer now threatening the other end of the village.
Okay, this threat is neutralized. Let's go to the other one.
Exactly. So now the Warriors are going towards Custer. So, you could argue that Custer is intentionally trying to create a diversion to draw them off from Reno, grab the non-combatants, and I've sent those orders to Benteen, so he'll be up. We'll reunite the regiment. We'll bag the non-combatants, and here we go. You could, again, we don't know, but you could argue that's what he's thinking.
Okay. So there's an aspect that I think I remember about him thinking he was hitting the other end of the village, but he discovered it was the middle of the village. Is that myth, or what is that?
I think it's probably myth. I think in the immediate aftermath of the battle, I think the village appeared a lot larger to the survivors and the army guys than it actually was. When he moved into Medicine Tail Coulee, he was probably across from, if not the north end of the village, pretty close to it.
Okay.
But after the immediate fighting, the Indians moved the village a little bit further north. So when the Army survivors inspected it on the 27th and the 28th, the remains of the village looked twice as big as what it probably was.
Okay, got it.
I think all things being equal, I think trying to bag the non-combatants, and then obviously then you're going to hope you neutralize the Warriors. I've got your women and children surrounded.
Right.
I think that's probably as plausible a theory as any. If you don't like that theory, a lot of what he's doing at this point doesn't make sense. So you got to account for something.
So at this point, things are kind of falling apart for Custer, right?
Well,
is that fair to say?
Warrior pressure's increasing. And at some point, to make a long story short, the Warriors basically congregate on the Keogh Battalion. Somebody seems to deploy C Company, kind of pushes C Company down into a ravine to kind of clear out the warrior threat. Indians, probably led by a chief by the name of Lame White Man, rally, counterattack, overrun C Company, and then it starts to feel like dominoes are starting to fall.
Okay.
Calhoun and L Company is, by most accounts, probably the most organized defense on the battlefield. They form a skirmish line basically on this small hill, but they're now getting hit from multiple sides. And this is where the weaponry comes back into it, because we said we were going to talk about it. As warriors start infiltrating closer and closer, that single shot, long range advantage that you think you have from your Springfield carbines basically gets neutralized by the firepower of the Henry repeating rifles, because now you're in closer combat to each other. The long distance really isn't as much of an advantage. And, and while you're getting that second shot in, a warrior with a full magazine is starting to pump a bunch of rounds on you. And so eventually, warrior fire is going to then overwhelm Calhoun's position, and they're going to fall.
Not only that, but the numbers that they have.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, we have organized skirmish lines. We can hold off
BFD.
superior numbers, but yeah, warrior numbers. They're just continuing to encroach. They're using the terrain. It's guerrilla warfare. They're gullies and ravines, and working around every side of Keogh. Where our guys are kind of doing the standard. Okay, find the high ground and form a skirmish line kind of thing, and they're just hopelessly outmatched.
What are the numbers while we're talking about them here? A company is how many at that point?
Yeah. So a company, it's very similar. Actually, it's somewhat similar to
Civil War era.
Yeah, somewhat. Where we think of regiments and that sort of thing here at Gettysburg, but a company at Little Bighorn is between about 35 to 40 guys.
Okay, so not a lot.
Not a lot of guys.
And Indians, I mean, I've heard it all over the place, from just a couple thousand to 10,000 to 15,000 and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
What do scholars think today? What is the...
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. Been out on the field with Neil Mangum, former superintendent out there, and every time he's asked that question, he goes, I don't know how many there were, but there were enough to defeat Custer, and that was a pretty good Neil Mangum impression, I want to tell you. But you're right, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
I think they're probably facing, give or take, 2,000 warriors. Okay. And, you've seen estimates as high as,
10, 15,000.
Exactly. The village itself is maybe 9,000 total inhabitants. But if you put a gun to my head and had me to pick a number, I think 2,000 to 2,500 warriors is probably...
Yeah, that always sounded like a reasonable number to me.
Yeah.
Because let's say you had a village of 10,000, because it wasn't just the Sioux. It was the Sioux, the Cheyenne.
Right.
And
the Arapaho,
right.
Yep, all kinds of guys.
So, and these are all like renegades from the reservation, right? They're not reporting to the reservation. Some of them might have left the reservation.
And it was standard for them to leave the reservation and hunt this time of year. I mean, that's what they did.
This was normal.
Yeah, but I think what they've done, knowing the army is in the field, especially after Crook's failed attack in March, they're starting to band together for mutual defense and protection.
Okay.
So it's not like, again, I often see it portrayed as, Sitting Bull saying, rally for a final battle. It's nothing like that.
No.
But they are, getting together for mutual defense, and it's been called the largest Indian village ever seen in North America. I don't know how you quantify that, but clearly Custer has stumbled into a big one.
Right, it's kind of like a hornet's nest, because it seems like they don't really know that he's there, but they are very quick to react once they discover
exactly. So again, if you're going into this thinking, okay, they're running, we got to catch them, and all of a sudden you see hundreds and then thousands of these guys coming at you ready to fight, it's got to be a hell of a mind, mind shock.
Now, just to make a clearer picture, though, the Indians weren't all carrying Winchesters and Henrys.
Correct.
We still had bows and arrows.
Correct.
There were some flintlocks, I think, in the mix.
That's a great point. You've got everything. So it's often portrayed as the Indians just overwhelm them with repeating rifles.
Yeah.
I think archaeology identified maybe about 30% of the Indian weapons were repeaters. Okay. But you're right. You've got everything. You got the bow and arrow. They're picking up guns, from Reno's guys, and bringing them to bear on Custer's guys. Right. So you got a wide array of everything coming at them.
And a big thing, maybe I'm wrong, but I think a big thing with the cavalry's carbines is that they the ammunition is defective or at least not good quality, and it's jamming.
Well, that's another great debate, and so what was said in some of the accounts immediately afterwards was that we could see evidence of broken pocket knives, as troopers were frantically trying to get defective cartridges out of the guns. Archaeology looked at that. And they studied weapons, and they suggested it was probably not a huge factor.
Oh, okay.
It was probably not a huge factor in Custer's defeat. And, you really don't see a lot of accounts from Reno's guys of it being a problem. But on the other hand, if you're badly outnumbered and outgunned, and even 5% or 10% of your guys are doing this because you can't get an ejector out, it's it's still probably a factor, but probably not as heavy of a factor as, kind of mythology is always played it out.
Because it's kind of like, all the excuses made for Lee losing at Gettysburg. Like, it's just hard to believe that Custer lost because he lost.
Right. Custer lost because the Indians won, but you can't accept that.
No,
you have
it's so hard.
Excuses.
So it's defective bullets.
Reno was drunk.
Reno was drunk.
Yeah.
Hey, I'd be drunk too if I had to do that.
You're probably drunk right now. You could be, right?
Totally hammered right now. Okay, so Custer and his battalion fall back to what do they call it now? Last Stand Hill?
Yeah.
Custer Hill?
Yeah. So Keogh's battalion of 3 companies is basically just getting overrun and wiped out. Keogh among the killed, obviously, on that part of the field. But Custer and the other 2 companies, they've done some sort of foray down towards the north end of the river. Again, kind of like at Medicine Tail Coulee, they don't seem to have pressed a crossing. There's been enough Indian resistance, apparently, to push them back. And there's some belief that Custer probably throws out E Company into a skirmish line on kind of the western slope of the ridge. But eventually, with pressure coming in multiple directions, they rally on a piece of high ground at the north end of the ridge that we call today Last Stand Hill, or if you prefer, Custer Hill. So at that point, you're down to 2 companies, as well as remnants of, some of Keogh's guys are fleeing on foot to get through. Again, the Indians call it like hunting buffalo and, just shooting them down. But you eventually probably get somewhere in the vicinity of 45 or so guys kind of rallying on Last Stand Hill. Horses are apparently shot down, for barricades. And what do you do? What do you do at that point? Myth has Custer and all the guys, standing up straight and shooting. Yeah. But obviously, nobody's standing up on that hill. Bullets are coming in from multiple directions. Indians are letting loose, with bows and arrows into the barricade. And you can only wonder what Custer was thinking at that moment. At least I always wonder.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I kind of feel bad for him because I always saw him as kind of like a jovial, fun-loving egomaniac, and here's like the party is over.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to be the hero. I'm going to be the dead guy.
Yeah, no hijinks with Tom in Boston. On this one, right? So I always wonder. What do you do at a moment like that? Does your life literally flash before your eyes? Did you think of "Come on, you Wolverines" at Gettysburg?
Right.
Does your life just play back like that? Yeah. But it had to be just the feeling of utter defeat. And, meanwhile, Benteen has come back on the trail. He has shown his order to Reno, But seeing Reno's shattered command, Benteen is elected to basically stay with Reno. Now, one of Benteen's subordinates rides forward about a mile or so to some high ground that we call today Weir Point.
Captain Weir, yes.
Captain Thomas Weir. That we go to Weir Point, and eventually the Benteen Reno command follows him. But they essentially watch Custer's last stand. So you could ask.
Oh, really?
So you could ask. Are Custer and the guys behind this barricade of horses, looking and thinking until the last minute? Come on, there's the rest of the regiment. Where the hell are they? I mean, you just can't imagine what was going on.
I just imagine that whichever your favorite Custer movie is, no matter how good they get the history leading up to that moment, none of them come close to what it was like. Like, my favorite is Son of the Morning Star.
Yeah, mine too.
Right?
Mine too. Right.
And I think it's a pretty good guess at what it was like for those guys, because none of them are here.
Right.
And, but there were Indian accounts. The white man just chose not to listen to them.
Yeah.
Or publish them too much.
Yeah.
My favorite one on how long it lasted is the one that I think it was like as long as it takes a man to eat his lunch.
Right.
So like 10 or 15 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
So a hungry man to eat his lunch. That's right. Yeah. So I just look at it after hearing that. To me, it just in my mind was just a slaughter. There was no military anything to it except that they were wearing uniforms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was just, we're surrounded and just shoot until you're down. Because
I think you're probably right. I mean, there's some guys, who think, well, some couriers were sent out. Again, other guys think, well, another, E Company was thrown back out here as a skirmish line. Because again, we don't really understand the timing of a lot of that. But, the Indians talk about arching arrows into this barricade. And again, archaeology. Archaeology helped identify a number of Indian firing positions.
Okay.
So, Last Stand Hill is taking gunfire from multiple sides. There's an account, Cheyenne oral tradition, that a group of what they call suicide boys that makes a charge up kind of from the north end, and they kind of come up and charge into the this beleaguered group of soldiers, and kind of brings on the end. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of the suicide boy theory, but again, many historians are, and that could have been literally the beginning of the end.
And I'm sure some soldiers committed suicide,
Yeah.
I mean,
I think you had to. I think, the old axiom, save the last bullet for yourself.
Right.
Now, again, there were warriors who talked about mass suicide. And what we think with some of that is, they were thinking, well, the white man might be angry at me for killing the long hair. And, if we say it was mass suicide, maybe they'll kind of... so I don't think it was a mass suicide, but no doubt there were individuals.
You had to be popping your head.
You knew what was going on. Obviously Custer was found with a bullet hole in the temple and in the chest, and to this day people still wonder if that one to the temple was a finishing shot or not.
Well, my guess on that, because I read that there was no blood coming out of it, so my guess is that it was the chest that killed him, and the head was just a stray shot or something.
Could have been. Yeah, I think there's some varying accounts on that. Some that the head wound did bleed and kind of oozed down into his mustache and all that stuff. So like a lot of it's debated. But I tend to agree with you. I tend to think it was the chest shot, and then maybe the head just kind of finished him off or something.
And that's another thing too is Tom. How was he found and identified?
Yeah, so Tom is basically beaten to a pulp.
Yeah.
His head is said to have been smashed as flat as the palm of a hand.
Yeah.
Arrows just literally his body. Apparently what happens is a couple of days later, when the survivors, the Reno Benteen survivors, are burying the dead, they kind of roll them over, and like under a broken arm, they recognize the tattoo, and that's pretty much how they identify Tom Custer.
Because these guys aren't laying there fully uniformed. A lot of them are naked.
Yeah, stripped and
mutilated.
Yeah.
So it wasn't enough to kill them.
Well, and the theory is, and obviously the idea behind the mutilations was, A, it was Indian anger, but B, this idea that, you'll enter the next life in a debilitated
Handicapped,
state.
yeah.
But the idea too is really from a practical level that we think probably the ones who were most badly mutilated were probably the ones that were still alive. And the squaws and the boys and the children are coming up and are really doing a number on those that are still alive. So from that perspective, you can only guess how much of that Tom Custer was still alive for. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
pretty horrific stuff. And if I could, for my Civil War friends who are always like, oh, why do you study this battle? It's only 200 guys or kind of thing. This is real warfare.
Yeah.
This isn't, hey, I'm getting captured and we're going to swap some tobacco for some coffee until I get paroled. This is some hardcore
It's
stuff.
total warfare.
Total warfare.
There's no such thing as a combatant or a civilian.
Yep.
You're all the enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's to the death.
Yep.
And if you're captured, it's only because they want to use you for something.
Yeah, probably. So
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's fascinating. We mentioned before counting coup. I'm sure people have heard that before, but explain to them what that is. What is a coup stick, and how do you count coup?
Yeah, basically the idea, and you see examples of this in the fighting over at Reno Hill on the 26th. The idea for a warrior to to exert honor for himself.
Yeah.
You have a stick, and forgive me, I don't pretend to be an expert on Native American culture, but you have a stick, and basically the idea is if you can get as close to your enemy as possible, preferably while he's alive, and touch him with it, that's like counting coup, and it's a way of showing your bravery in combat, that you could do this.
So you mentioned Reno Hill. The story does not end with Custer being killed. There's Reno and Benteen. First, let's talk about Reno.
Yeah.
So they're over on Reno Hill, right?
Which is about 4 miles away from Last Stand Hill.
Okay. And when Benteen gets back with Reno, what condition does he find Reno in?
Yeah, so Benteen arrives pretty much right as Reno's command was arriving on the bluffs, and pretty much comes upon a shattered column.
Yeah.
Reno himself has been he's lost his hat. He's got a bandana kind of tied around his head. By some accounts, he's sort of lost control and is with his revolver shooting at Indians that are well out of range. Which you might kind of listen to this and think, what's the big deal? But that's the kind of thing you don't like to see your commanding officer doing. And,
unhinged.
Unhinged. And, Benteen, has got to kind of say to Reno, come on, rein it in, come back here, kind of thing. And he shows his order to Reno, but Benteen at this point also has to make one of the battle's most controversial decisions. Do I stay and help Reno, or do I come forward and find
Follow my
Custer?
orders. Yeah.
And, Reno reportedly says to Benteen, for God's sakes, I've lost half my command. Stop. And Benteen, right or wrong, makes the decision to stay with Reno at that point. I think like a lot of the guys, Benteen's kind of like, okay, what the hell is going on here? Now, more or less within 20 minutes or so after Benteen's junction with Reno, they hear the firing downriver.
Yeah.
It's initially like 2 volleys, boom, boom, but then it's gunfire that one guy I think describes as going on for maybe as much of an hour. But they hear the gunfire downriver, and now this is where Weir and some of the other guys start getting impatient and saying, why are we not going to the sound of the guns? Custer's down there, let's go. And when Weir goes to what we call today Weir Point, other companies eventually follow, including Benteen. So one of his subordinates is just taking off on him, and eventually Benteen is following his subordinate kind of thing. But I think when Benteen gets to that point, he sticks a guidon in the ground, hoping it'll be a signal, to Custer, ooh, we're over here kind of thing. But I think at that point, Benteen sees the extent of the village, sees the number of warriors in the field. And I think one of the other officers comes up to Benteen and says, this is bad. If somebody doesn't take charge here, this is going to be another Fetterman massacre, another Phil Kearny affair. And I think it's at that point, late afternoon, evening of the 25th, Benteen realizes, okay, I got to take charge here.
So it sounds like there's like a total disintegration of command. I mean, you got a subordinate taking it upon himself to go help,
right.
and then his commander follows him.
Reno
superior.
Reno disappears for a while to go down and find the body of his beloved aide Benny Hodgson. So he's just like gone for a while.
But there's still Indians swarming Reno Hill.
Well, again, that's part of it is, for a while they leave.
Okay.
They leave to fight Custer.
To go get Custer.
And again, for those who like your Little Bighorn timelines, this is one of the things we can pretty much lock on. But by the time, they're on Weir Point, again, some estimates have them on it for as long as an hour, watching the fighting going on over at Custer's Field. They say they don't know what's going on, but they think they see Indians finishing off Custer's wounded. They think, okay, maybe Custer's been repulsed and has gone on to find Terry and Gibbon. The warriors come back. And so then they've got to basically fall back from Weir Point, and the soldiers basically return to the position that more or less Reno had gotten them in at the first place. It's kind of a saucer. There's an access to water on one side. There's some open ground to the east, which is going to leave them susceptible to fire. But they basically say this is as good of a defensive position as any, and then they dig in for the night of the 25th and most of the 26th.
What would you say is the best Little Bighorn book for someone who hasn't read about it before but wants to start getting into it?
Yeah, common question. It's like Gettysburg. There are many layers to the story, and obviously some books are very heavy in the weeds and others, are more for beginners or that sort of thing. Matt has in front of him a copy of Son of the Morning Star, which is also one of my favorite books, but I think kind of the standard, if you want to recommend a book to somebody starting out, would be Jim Donovan's A Terrible Glory. It's a good one. It's a good one volume. It goes into the history of the Indian Wars and why this happened, and pretty much all the way through the Reno Court of Inquiry in 1879. Again, hardcore guys, they want to look for other stuff, and that's fine. But I think to answer your question,
that is a good answer.
I think it would be the Donovan book.
I just read that over the fall, and it was good. I mean,
it's well written.
It's well written,
right.
And it's got all you need to know to get a grasp on the thing, and then go to this one.
And then you can go into all the what ifs and the controversies and all that's the timelines and other books. But
Son of the Morning Star is great, and if you go on YouTube and you type in Son of the Morning Star, not only is it a wonderful soundtrack, but you can also find the miniseries with Gary Cole and Rosanna Arquette from what was it, 89
91
or 90
or something?
Yeah,
91 or something.
It's well done. It really follows the book pretty well.
And the guy from Office Space, Gary Cole, plays Custer. If you remember Office Space, right?
That's right.
Yeah, right. Gary, right? Yeah,
that's right. Gary Cole.
Yeah, he plays Custer.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I know. It's very weird to see him in other things because I first saw him as Custer.
Okay, yeah.
That's how I first knew of him.
Yeah.
So then to see him as the dad in the Brady Bunch.
Exactly. Yeah, with the afro and.
I know, but I love Gary Cole though. He's
if
funny.
Custer lived in the 1970s, he probably would have had an afro too.
Absolutely,
I think he would have. So
he was a man of his time as far as fashion went. All right, Jim. I think we told them enough.
Yeah,
to wet their whistle, right?
Well, more than that, we kind of beat the hell out of the topics. So.
We did. I could go on forever. I love listening to you talk about it, and I really you take people out there on tours, right?
I do. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah.
So, unlike being a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg, I'm not really restricted on my ability to promote Little Bighorn tours. I do take people out there. Usually it's private groups. Well, it's always private groups and that sort of thing. And if anybody is interested in what, we think is a fascinating story on, some of the most beautiful ground in the country, drop me a line if you're interested in going out there.
Do you say, I'm doing it, this time this year, sign up, or do you wait for people to say, hey, I want you to take me around Little Bighorn?
Yeah, it's a good question. Typically, we'll kind of say, okay, I'll block, the first week in September of this year or that. Now, in 2021, I'm not going out there because I've been out there 5 out of the last 6 years.
Okay.
So I'm actually doing an Alamo tour in 2021.
Interesting.
But maybe 2022 if we get enough interest.
Maybe we should just put one together.
We could do that.
Would you want to do that?
2022, Little Bighorn?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Get out of the car at Little Bighorn with Jim Hessler.
Oh, my God. That would be freaking awesome.
I love Lewis, but Little Bighorn is mine. All right?
That's right. That would be fantastic.
That would be pretty cool.
I would love that. I've never been out there. I've always wanted to go out there, but I really want to get into it. Like, I don't want to just do a park service tour. I want to get into it.
No, this would be getting into. We get into the weeds. We follow the approach. Sometimes we go to the Rosebud. We get into it. 2022.
All right, let's talk about that over the next year and put that together.
Right.
Oh my God, that'd be so fantastic if we could do that. I would love that. All right, that's what we'll do. Jim, thanks very much for coming and doing this finally.
Thanks as always for having me. Again, another crossover event between our podcasts.
I love having you on because I could just listen to you talk all day.
You're the only one, but that's okay.
That's not true. A lot of our listeners are also your listeners, and I know. They compliment you to me. So
that's nice. Well,
yeah, they say
listeners, thank you.
That's right. They tell me they like listening to both shows.
Good.
And they get something different out of each one of them, and that's
what we're just doing it for fun, and
exactly.
It's all good. It's all good, man.
Thank you all for listening, and hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you next time. If you have another idea that you would like to hear Jim talk about, anything, let me know, and we'll have him on. But he's going to be busy for the next several months, so it might not be for a while.
Could be a little while.
Yeah,
we'll be back.
All right.
Time will go by like that.
I'm just trying to think. Do you have anything out lately? No, all your books are still your books, right? Everything's still nothing new with that.
Yep.
And he's one of the co-hosts of the Battle of Gettysburg podcast.
Yep, thank you.
Which you probably already listened to anyway. So anyway, thank you everybody, and have a good one.
Take care.